So picture this. A guy lies about $1 stocks and makes millions upon millions of dollars. He gets caught, serves only 22 months in jail, and then Hollywood turns his life story into a massive blockbuster movie. Yeah, we're diving into the true story of Jordan Belfort, the man who scammed America and somehow got rich all over again from the story of his crimes.
You know, this quote from the man himself really gets to the heart of it all, doesn't it? It frames the whole story and why we're so fascinated by it. Was he just a product of his time reflecting the greed around him, or was he something way more calculating? Well, let's find out. To really understand the Wolf of Wall Street, we can't start on Wall Street. Nope, we have to go back to Bayside, Queens. It's a working-class neighborhood where a young Jordan Belfort was already showing signs that he had absolutely no interest in playing by the normal rules.
Get this. By the time he was just 16 years old, Belfort had already banked 20 grand from a single summer business. He was selling Italian ices on the beach. While most kids his age would maybe buy a used car, Jordan had much, much bigger plans.
So with that money, he briefly enrolled in dental school. But on the very first day, the dean told the new students this. And according to Belfort's own story, he just stood up, nodded, and walked right out the door. He wasn't there to clean teeth, he was there to get rich. And he knew, in that instant, this was not the path for him.
His next move? A pretty scrappy door-to-door meat and seafood business. And it was a complete disaster. We're talking melting steaks, unpaid bills, the whole thing went bankrupt, fast. But inside that failure, he found his superpower. He realized the product didn't matter. It could be meat, it could be anything. He could sell it. The salesman was officially born.
So after the meat business went bust, Belfort knew he needed a product with a much better payout. He found it on Wall Street. But his real opportunity, the thing that changed everything, came from a very unexpected place, the massive market crash of 1987.
Okay, so this is the crucial turning point. After the crash, Belfort got laid off from a legit investment firm. He could have tried to get back in, but he saw this other path. On one side, you've got traditional Wall Street. It's heavily regulated, commissions are tiny. But on the other side, you had penny stocks. This was the Wild West. The commissions were a mind-blowing 50%, there were basically no rules, and the customers, they were often small, everyday investors who were just really easy to persuade. For a salesman like Belfort, it was a no-brainer.
And this is exactly what he was jumping into. You got to understand, these weren't shares of big, stable companies. These were super high-risk stocks from tiny, sometimes totally fake companies. For him, the lack of rules, the lack of oversight, that wasn't a bug. It was the entire feature. This was a kingdom where he could make all his own rules.
So he found his gold mine. Now he just needed a crew to help him dig. And this led to the founding of his infamous farm, Stratton Oakmont. The name was brilliant, right? It was designed to sound old money, prestigious, like it had been around for 100 years. The reality? It started in a Long Island strip mall.
And just look at who he hired. He didn't want Ivy League grads with their fancy financial models. No way. He wanted bartenders, college dropouts, local hustlers. Guys with no experience that he could shape into his own image. The only qualification he cared about was what he called hunger, that relentless, burning desire to get rich, just like him.
He took this hungry crew and armed them with a devastatingly effective and completely illegal scheme. It's called the pump and dump, and this little trick became the engine that powered his entire empire.
So how did this actually work? Let's break it down. First, Belfort and his inner circle would secretly buy up huge amounts of some worthless penny stock for, well, pennies. Then, he'd unleash his army of brokers to pump that stock using these aggressive, totally misleading sales scripts to create a massive buying frenzy. You have to remember, this was before the internet. You couldn't just Google a company's financials. You were relying on the voice on the other end of the phone. So as all these unsuspecting investors piled in, the stock price would shoot through the roof. Then, right at the very peak, Belfort and his buddies would dump all their shares at once, making millions in an instant. The stock would then immediately crash to zero, leaving all their clients holding worthless paper.
And boy, did it work. I mean, it worked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. This scheme generated an absolutely obscene amount of money, and that money funded a culture of pure, unfiltered chaos and excess at Stratton Oakmont. What's this number? $2 grand. That was the price tag on the Armani suits his young, inexperienced brokers were all expected to wear. It was their uniform, a symbol that they'd made it. All of it funded by the life savings of the very people they were scamming over the phone.
A day at the office at Stratton Oakmont was not your typical 9 to 5.
The stories are just legendary. We're talking strippers in the conference room at lunch, so much drug use that lines were literally being snorted off the company's own compliance manuals, and this constant, roaring, high-pressure environment where top brokers were treated like rock gods and anyone who underperformed was publicly humiliated.
You know, if you need one single story to capture his state of mind at the time, this is it. He was so convinced of his own invincibility that he ordered the captain of his massive yacht to sail directly into a Mediterranean storm. The yacht, of course, sank. Everyone on board had to be rescued by the Italian Navy. It's just the perfect metaphor for his life, isn't it? A beautiful, expensive ship of excess driven recklessly into a storm of his own creation.
That sinking yacht was a pretty clear omen, because back in New York, the authorities were no longer just a little suspicious. Oh no. They were actively building a case, and the walls were finally starting to close in.
Now, the downfall didn't happen overnight. Suspicions really started bubbling up as early as '94. The whole yacht disaster drew even more unwanted attention. Then in October of '96, federal agents stormed the offices, carting out boxes and boxes of evidence. The party was officially over, and by 1998, Belfort was formally indicted.
So, he's looking at decades in prison. The master salesman does what he always does. He looks for the best possible deal for himself. He flipped. The guy who preached loyalty above everything else agreed to wear a wire, recording his business partners and his closest friends, all to save his own skin. He sold out his entire crew.
All right, so the criminal mastermind is caught. You think that means a long prison sentence, justice for the victims. End of story, right? Nope, not even close. What we get instead is the truly unbelievable second act of Jordan Belfort's life.
For orchestrating a fraud that stole over $200 million from thousands of regular people, Jordan Belfort was sentenced to just 22 months in a minimum security prison. He played tennis, he wrote a book. In fact, his cellmate was the comedian Tommy Chong, who was actually the one who encouraged him to write his story down in the first place.
And this is where the story becomes truly outrageous. Let's just look at the scales of justice here. For Belfort, the consequence was a short prison stay that led directly to a best-selling book, a blockbuster movie, and a brand-new, lucrative career as a motivational speaker. And for his victims, the consequences were lost retirement savings, remortgaged homes, total financial ruin, and to this day, only a tiny fraction of the $110 million he was ordered to repay has ever actually been paid back.
And all of this leads to a final, really unsettling question. His story became a global phenomenon. People cheered for him in the movie theater. He successfully rebranded himself from a convicted felon into some kind of master of sales. It just makes you wonder about the stories we tell and the ones we choose to celebrate. Why do we so often celebrate a figure like the Wolf of Wall Street? Is it because deep down we never really wanted to see him punished? But maybe, just maybe, a small part of us wanted to be him? Something to think about.